Google Hangout before.
You're coming through absolutely fine. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Find a need. So
excellent.
Yes. Did you want a full name was okay, or just Kevin from the Flopcast?
Kevin from the Flopcast is good.
All right. Sounds good. All right. And we're back once again with Pop Culture Cosmos. This is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. Please, if you get a chance, please check us out on the Podcast Radio Network every Monday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Pacific time. Also, as well, we are also on the ESO Network, the Tangent Bound Network, Stitcher, iTunes. Also as well, podcast.com, Google Play, and of course our home site, popculturecosmos.wordpress.com. So I have a great guest for us here today. It's a great guest indeed to have here on the show. A little bit different from one of the topics we usually talk about here on the show, but I thought it'd be really neat to do so, and also let you fans out there know exactly how you can actually interact and then help decide this as well. It's the candidates for the most recent entry coming up for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And, I did some, background of looking into it and whatnot. And I found that I think the best person that could help me out with this is someone who really has done already a little bit more work than I have on it and has done a lot of talking about the candidates themselves. And that's Kevin from the Flopcast. That's right. It's a great podcast, and you are eligible to, if you want, you can catch that out there, every week on the ESO Network. Is that correct? Because I've heard your show on the ESO Network, and I think it pops up every week, correct?
We are indeed a weekly show. Yeah. Welcome to the ESO Network, by the way, Gerald. It's good to have pop culture as a part of the network. And we've been doing the Flopcast for almost 5 years now, every single week.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Besides the ESO Network, I just want to make sure, are you on any other outlets, or can anybody catch you on any other way except outside of the awesome ESO Network, which is awesome. And I'm so glad to be a part of it. But I want to make sure they, in case the ESO Network, maybe the page goes down, just in case, God forbid, whatnot, there's any other way to get you.
Yeah, the easiest way to find us is just go to our main website, which is flopcast.net, and that has links to everything from there.
Absolutely. I've checked it out. Not only does it reach out to your Facebook, but it reaches out to all your social media, and obviously it gives great descriptions of your episodes as well. So getting right into it, it seems like it's a fairly strong class this year as far as those that are eligible for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the candidates that were chosen. First off, before we go into it, now that over the years there's been, now there's quite a number of entrants into the Hall of Fame, and it's now such a diverse array of musicians, of artists, and people responsible in the music industry for creating it as it is. Should we still call it the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah, that's a valid question, I think. And that's something that when people go through these lists every year, like, I thought this was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Why is Janet Jackson on the list, and that kind of thing? And yeah, that you can make that argument, and it's really like a popular music Hall of Fame more than strictly rock and roll. But I like the name. I like the name Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and rock is certainly at its roots, but I like that it's big enough to be more inclusive of the other styles of music that make up pop music in general. So I think it's fine.
And as I am as well. I just was wondering if over the years they maybe should transition it to something like the Music Hall of Fame, and then because they're now incorporating other artists, and obviously maybe touch on classical, country. I understand the Country Music Hall of Fame has their own, but reaching out, since they're going to such a more diverse audience, and obviously this list of candidates speaks to that.
Yeah, I don't see them expanding to classical anytime soon. That would be quite a leap. But and yeah, even country, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame hasn't really drifted towards country very much at all, unless you go back to some of the classic acts. Johnny Cash has been inducted, and you go back that far to when country was really part of the roots of rock and roll. But they've drifted so far apart since then. And I think it's such a strong brand, the name Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that even as they have become inclusive of a lot of different styles of music, I think it's always going to be called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I have a feeling as well. Obviously, they've already bought the rights to it, so they can go ahead and tout it as they please. But it's good to see that it is more than just rock and roll as far as it's concerned, especially the fact that, how they want to promote it to a larger base of music fans out there. So when, it's episode, which episode were you talking about as far as a 236?
Which Flopcast episode?
Yeah, which Flopcast episode? Because I want to have them check it out.
That would be Flopcast episode 235, which came out just about a month ago.
Okay, because you're up to 238 now, and if you get a chance, again, that's through either the ESO network, our awesome partners, also as well flopcast.net. If you want to check it out, that is 235, where they dealt in detail in regards to you and your partner Cornflake.
Yes.
Dealt in detail regarding the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So we see the list of candidates, and I've been checking them out, and some really stick out. I mean, we talked a little bit. You mentioned briefly Janet Jackson. Obviously, in my opinion, she's probably the top name on the list because she garnered the most success over the course of her career, which I understand is not the precursor for it. It's influence in the musical industry and whatnot, but she definitely has made her mark in the industry. So I think if you're just basing from a music standpoint, she definitely would be probably my number one candidate there. But
and Janet, again, that's an example of it's not strictly rock. Janet certainly is bigger, I would say, in dance and pop, but she was huge. She was a huge star. And I think that the Hall of Fame tends to recognize not just who was innovative and who was influential, but also who was just culturally massive like that. That certainly earns you a spot at some point. She was nominated last year as well, so this is her second nomination, and she's probably going to get in, if not this time, then somewhere down the line.
I agree with you as well, but there's definitely a lot of heavy influence from what I'm looking at here. Let me just run down the list of nominees for everyone out there. And before I forget, you can vote on who you think should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If you go to www.rockhall.com/vote, that's rockhall.com/vote, you can vote on the nominees, and it is, I think, available till, I'm looking through it right now, I think it was December 7th, if I'm not mistaken, that you can vote to. So check it out today. If you're listening to this before that time, it is the rock and roll inductions that you can vote on. That's rockhall.com/vote. So we've got, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order. The group Bad Brains, Shaka Khan, Chic, Depeche Mode, Electric Light Orchestra, which everybody knows as ELO, the Geils Band, Jane's Addiction, of course Janet Jackson, who we talked about, Joan Baez, Joe Tex, Journey, Kraftwerk, I gotta say Kraftwerk that way, MC5, Pearl Jam, Steppenwolf, the Cars, the Zombies, Tupac Shakur, and Yes. And again, it goes as far as, when you look at that list, what are some of the names that really stick out that you feel should be in the hall this time around?
Well, the names that really popped out for me, Electric Light Orchestra was a big one, because I think that's one of those long overdue nominations. I don't think they were ever nominated before, but ELO, hugely popular, certainly in the 70s and early 80s, and so well respected. Just people really appreciate the songcraft of Jeff Lynne and ELO, and the production and the instrumentation and the writing, the vocals, the huge sound that they had. And that's a band that really, their reputation has only grown over the years. People love ELO. So I think it's long overdue.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. They created such a unique sound, especially in the late '70s and early '80s with their music, and definitely I think they had such a unique style even for that era of music as far as what they were producing at that time.
Oh, sure. I mean, it was the disco era, and you could dance to it, so that the disco people were happy to dance to ELO. But there was also just such brilliant songcraft behind what they were doing.
Exactly. I love their use of classical instruments in their music. Just basically, they were willing to go beyond the realm of just we've got some guitars, drums, let's go. You know, they were willing to go ahead and go outside the box to create a unique sound all their own. Who else? For me, I think I'm going to start off with we talked about Janet Jackson, but Tupac Shakur. I
Yeah.
think his influence has grown after even larger after his unfortunate death. But your thoughts on Tupac Shakur?
I tend to plead ignorance on Tupac Shakur. I don't think I ever heard his name until the news reports of his death. I'm really not a rap guy, so he was really off my radar. As far as rap, I know the '80s stuff. I know Run DMC and Beastie Boys and the kind of early years of rap, and beyond that, I just don't know it. So that he's certainly a huge name and has become sort of a legendary figure in the world of rap. I can't speak to his music or his influence, but so I defer to those who know rap way better than me.
Well, no, and I don't blame you a bit. But yes, it has almost taken a life upon his own. But he is, from what I've been able to investigate and read and understand over the course of the years since his passing, his influence that he's given to the rap industry, has seemed like something that has made it possible for him to become eligible into the Hall of Fame, and somebody that definitely will always looks like he's left his mark with the industry as a whole. What are some of the other names that you're thinking of as far as that should be in at this point in time? Because there are some really, really quality names amongst this group.
Absolutely. I mean, if I had to say what's the act on this list that I think has the best shot at actually getting in, I'd say it was Pearl Jam.
Yeah,
I think that's one of those bands that as soon as they're eligible, they get popped right in. And
I know because they created that along with Nirvana, that grunge sound, and they basically started a movement that for that it defines the 1990s.
yeah, and there were all those bands the grunge and that kind of '90s alt bands, and so many bands popped up at that time. But Pearl Jam was certainly one of the biggest, and they didn't go anywhere. They stuck around, and they've been a huge band ever since. And really, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, here's one of those bands that really is one of the definitive rock acts of the last quarter century. So I think they're going to get waved right in their very first nomination.
I agree with you. Agree with you 100% on that because I think that's just something that needs to happen to represent that era of time. Any others that really just stick out on the page? I mean, there's a lot of hit makers there, but maybe did not leave their influence. I'm going to start off by saying, Geils Band, Journey, especially Journey had a ton of hits, had
Yeah.
a lot of hit albums, but did they really leave their mark on the music industry?
Yeah, and Journey, I would answer that with yes. I think Journey definitely deserves to get in, and I think Journey is a band that whose reputation kind of hurt them as far as their chances of getting in. I think the kind of snob elite forces who tend to play a hand in who gets nominated, who gets elected in, kind of look down on bands like Journey. They're a little too poppy, and that arena rock sound, like they made a huge pile of classic pop rock songs, but they never really got a lot of respect as a serious rock band. And I think they absolutely deserve a spot. They made a bunch of incredible, hugely popular songs, and that you hear all their songs to this day. They were massive, and that whole like the kind of the genre of arena rock, I like to call it, and all those bands that kind of came up from the mid '70s through the '80s that just had that big arena sound. And it was coming out of, on the one hand, you had the punk acts coming up in the '70s, but then on the other hand you had these big rock bands coming up at the same time, and very few of them. I mean, Van Halen is in, but that's really a lot of those big bands of that era have not gotten in yet, and I think they should.
Well, I would also, on a personal level, would probably say Kiss would probably seem to me fall into that group where there was much more style, excellent merchandisers as far as how to be able to package and sell their product than actual maybe influence as far as from a musical standpoint, but where they succeeded as far as from a promotional standpoint is, I think really had a heavy influence on the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And Kiss was one of those bands, and Kiss is in the Hall of Fame, but they just got in maybe 3-4 years ago, I think. So it took them a long time to get in, and it's because, again, that's that kind of snob, I think, elite attitude, looking down on an act like Kiss. And yeah, I don't think Kiss, I wouldn't consider them great musically, but culturally, they were massive and very important in the history of rock, and they absolutely deserve to get in. And that was one that it took way longer than it should to get Kiss in there. And I'm not a huge Kiss fan, but I was very happy to see them finally get inducted. And I definitely want to see Journey get into.
Absolutely. I would only if Steve Perry goes on stage with them one more time.
Yeah, and I don't know where I heard this. I heard someone say that apparently Steve Perry has said somewhere that he would perform and appear with the band at the Hall of Fame. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is. I think it'd be great to see them all perform together, the classic lineup. So that'd be great. We'll see if it happens.
That would be great indeed. I mean, their lead singer now, he's awesome. He can hit, he is like a Steve Perry clone.
He's amazing. I went to a Journey concert this past summer, so I saw them perform with and it's the old classic lineup plus their new singer, who's Arlen Pineda, who's a much younger guy from the Philippines. They found him on the internet. They saw him on YouTube and hired him, and he's incredible. So yeah, the Journey is still doing great shows today.
Oh, that's awesome to hear, and definitely I've heard nothing but great things about his vocal quality. But yes, having Steve Perry up there on stage, maybe singing one last time, or maybe it will spice up maybe a reunion tour of that type, Indy. But who knows on that?
Yeah.
Like backstage stuff. So
yeah. As far as the Geils Band, and this is I'm a Boston guy. I'm in the Boston area now, so I was happy to see that there's 2 Boston bands on this list, and that's the Geils Band and the Cars, who are both classic Boston area rock bands from the 70s and 80s. And I think Geils has been, both these bands have been nominated more than once now. And I'm a fan of both bands. I'd like to see them both go in, especially the Cars. I've been a Cars fan since I was a kid. I saw the Cars perform on their last tour back in the 80s. So I feel like I'm not being very impartial when I say that I'm kind of pulling for both those acts. There are probably a lot of acts that deserve to get in ahead of them. However, I'll admit, I don't think the Cars, as great as they were, one of my favorite bands, I don't think they were super influential. They were kind of the perfect band for that era.
And so, I want to ask you this because they kind of leaned over in the 80s from a more guitar heavy sound to a more synthesized sound. So again, that elitist attitude may have come into play, or may still come into play as far as people voting for them, even though they achieved such tremendous success. I cannot tell you how much I love the song Drive, and it's just they've got so many other big hits as well. But is it maybe that attitude in there going in there?
I think a bit, yeah. I think sometimes people would think, well, the Cars, they were a little goofy when they didn't look like teen idol guys. They had kind of a quirky look to them and a quirky sound, and they made those wacky videos. People remember all those classic, You Might Think, and all the
Yes.
crazy videos they made back then. But they were never the biggest band in the world, but everybody liked the Cars. Like the cool kids liked the Cars, and the people that just wanted to hear catchy songs on the top 40 radio, they liked the Cars too. So they're kind of they were the perfect band for that era. As I said, they started in about 1977 and they broke up about a decade later, 88. They called it quits. And they just they arrived fully formed. I like to say, like you listen to the first Cars album from '77, and you listen to the last Cars album from '87, and the songs are interchangeable. They had their perfect sound just right out of the gate. And yeah, it was a great guitar band, but also they always made use of synthesizers and keyboards and drum machines and all the technology they could get their hands on. They loved it. They used it. And it just made beautiful music. I'm a huge Cars fan, so I'm certainly pulling for them.
Definitely need. Now, when it comes to the Geils Band, beyond the centerfold, obviously, which they had, had tremendous success with, do you see them more as maybe an outside shot? Because I understand you're a great fan as far as from being a Boston music scene, but
That's right.
I'm going to say, as far as from because I'm from Vegas here, we like to put everything on a bet, maybe on an outsider chance as far as it's concerned, maybe a little bit more of a long shot.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that they certainly never. They had a couple of big hit songs. They had Centerfold, they had Freeze Frame, and kind of squeaked into the top 40 a couple times beyond that, I think. But they were known in the '70s as like a great live band, a great party band, and this kind of blues, jazz, rock mix that they were doing through the '70s. So they were kind of critical favorites, I think, back then. But they really weren't selling a lot of records until those breakthrough pop hits in the '80s. So they never really were as huge for an extended period of time as a lot of other bands.
Who else do you think sticks out? Now, Steppenwolf, because Steppenwolf, again, we get to a situation like the Geils Band. Everybody knows Magic Carpet Ride, and of course, Born to Be Wild.
Yeah.
But after that, it's pretty much a dark hole as far as, unless you are really a Steppenwolf fan.
Yeah, definitely. That's all I know about Steppenwolf are the two songs that you just named. I mean, they were a little before my time. They're one of those kind of '60s, late '60s hippie era bands. But yeah, are they just a two-hit wonder? Maybe. Now, that being said, those are two pretty massive hits, and especially Born to Be Wild is just one of those iconic rock songs. So,
indeed, you'll be hearing that. I mean, that's going to be played 200 years down the line, that still are used in commercials or used in movies or whatnot. So
oh yeah, and there's a lyric in that song is heavy metal thunder, and that's, I believe, the first time the term heavy metal was heard in a song.
That's correct. Yep, indeed.
They weren't referring to the genre of heavy metal, which didn't really exist yet, but the phrase at least was spoken for the first time by Steppenwolf. So should a band be able to get in based on one massive song? Well, I'd say
and a phrase.
Yeah, I would say maybe yes. That could be so important culturally to rock that yeah, maybe they should get in at some point.
Now, I want you to put your thinking cap on, and you wanted to add that we've talked about a few already as far as contenders is concerned. Some of the big contenders. Name me two that you see might sneak in the list that may surprise people when you say these names. You're looking at the list now, so let me know of two names, and I've got two names I have in mind that may not be the first choice, or at the first glance may not be the individuals that they would normally think of. But name me two that you might think might fall into that category.
Well, let's see. A name that you wouldn't necessarily think to be nominated. Well,
I'll tell you what. Would you like me to start off with mine?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. Well, I'll start off with the second choice I had, which was Joan Baez. I think Joan Baez, the Joan Baez at that time, very influential from a movement standpoint. Not just, you're from a hit standpoint, maybe not. From an album standpoint, maybe, that's up for debate, but definitely from what she represented at the time, she was an artist in heavy rotation. I think she represented something a little bit more as far as from a movement standpoint and feminist rights.
Joan Baez certainly very important culturally. Maybe more so than musically, and important musically as well, but her music was folk, very purely in the folk music camp. Yeah, as far as I know, she never went anywhere near a rock or a pop sound.
I believe that's correct, yes.
So given that, yeah, that is a surprising name in a way to see on this list, but on the other hand, maybe not such a big surprise, because again, she was around. She was doing music in the '50s. She's been around forever, and someone who's that important culturally, I think, deserves to be uh, part of the conversation. So I think when her name came up this year, I was surprised to see that I don't think she'd ever been nominated before, and someone who that big a name culturally, it's kind of surprising. But on the other hand, she has nothing to do with rock and roll, so it makes sense that maybe she wouldn't be the first name to come to mind either.
Yeah, like I said, it's just something out there, and I believe if it's something that the Academy may just want to get her in because of her contributions, like you said, on a cultural level, as opposed to just maybe from a folk music or music standpoint on that. So
Yeah.
My second one is it relates a little bit to today as far as the modern era of music, and that candidate is Kraftwerk. So
Yes.
they're a personal favorite of mine. I won't
Oh,
be
nice.
dishonest with you there. As someone who lived through the '80s and heard the, how should I say, the birth or the growing infancy of electronic music and synthesized music, and how it has evolved into EDM today, which I know some people may see it as the scourge of the united world. But to me, I still enjoy it. I still love synthesized music as a form, as an art form, as a music form. I understand that a lot of people's premonition now is just seeing someone with a headphone set like mine right now, just
That's right.
turning some turntables on a DJ and pushing buttons. But there is an artistry to it. There is a definite. If you listen to some of their music, with Musique Nonstop and Tour de France, their biggest hits, but also as well from. I bet you if you asked a lot of the EDM individuals that are big in the industry, you would get them as one of their heaviest influences in that realm. I know this is not their first nomination. I believe this is fourth or fifth, but it is at some point in time, some group from that era, either Kraftwerk, Yellow, or The Art of Noise, one of those three that were, such major forces in the music scene at that time, even with the era of new wave, even if the era of pop music, arena rock, glam rock, all that was going on at the time, but still these three bands still left their mark on the industry with their hits and their music, and that evolved into the Chemical Brothers and the Crystal Method of the '90s, and into the Daft Punk and all the great EDM artists of
Sure.
Today.
Absolutely.
So
I mean, to see Kraftwerk on this list, I was a little surprised to see the name there, but then I was also very happy because I love that stuff. I love that electronic sound, and especially the older stuff, like what they were doing, and the pioneers of a very, very important, very influential aspect of pop music. So absolutely, I hope that they do get in at some point. And yeah, Yellow and The Art of Noise, and the Buggles, even. You speak of The
yes,
Art of Noise, that was some of those same guys from The Art of Noise were in the Buggles, and they did some remarkable music at that point as well. And that's a
video
band that's
killed the radio star. It started MTV.
yeah. But people know the Buggles because of that first video on MTV. But I tell people all the time, go back and get the album, get the Age of Plastic album from the Buggles. It's a wonderful album.
Definitely, indeed. I like I said, at some point in time, that period of music has to be acknowledged because, like I said, I'm as a personal fan of that music when I was that age and that era, but seeing it evolve and still enjoying it to this day, I can still, when I hear EDM, I can still I can feel the influence still of those artists from the '80s as far as it's concerned, and even to the Buggles, like you said. When I listen to EDM, and I think at some point in time, if Kraftwerk, I understand, was the most critically accepted of the three. I know Art of Noise was probably the most commercial successful at that time, but I also know Yellow had the biggest hit of all three. So you could take your guess as far as anyway, but as long as one of them gets nominated, I think that needs to be represented.
Yeah, I agree.
Because people still hear "oh yeah,"
Sure.
Just like they almost hear almost as much as they hear "Born to Be Wild." But anyways, But is there any, like I said, is there any like maybe that's a little bit different that's out there, amongst the candidates that you see might be a good fit for the Hall of Fame or might be a good pick this year for the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with anybody on this list. I think it's a very strong batch of nominees. There's a few names that are not very well known, which is it's nice to see some of those acts get listed that are not household names necessarily. And I'm looking at the MC5 and Joe Tex and even Bad Brains.
Definitely, those are actually good choices as well. But how many do they actually enter in, or do they have up to, or I forget how many as far
I
as
think it's 5. I don't know if that's a fixed number, if it's always 5, but I think it's usually about 5.
They must reach a certain percentage. Is that correct?
I'm not sure exactly how they arrive at what number they stop at. So I think the last couple of years, at least, and the number has varied from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be fluid in some way. So I would assume you're looking at probably 5 acts from this list, 5 or 6 maybe, are actually going to be inducted.
That's definitely indeed something to look at, and you can help decide that vote. If you listen to this within the first week, you can go ahead and head on over to rockhall.com/vote. That's rockhall.com/vote. That's rockhall.com/vote to go ahead and vote today on your choices as far as it's concerned, because it's a little bit of a popularity contest, yes, but actually for the most part they have made good choices. And Kevin, I want to bring you back on the show on our next episode to talk about some of the candidates. They're not perfect, obviously. There's candidates that they maybe have overlooked over the years, and then there's some that they maybe have entered that maybe are not quite as deserving. But I'll get your thoughts on that on the next episode. If you could, if it'd be great if you can come back.
I would be happy to come back to Pop Culture Cosmos and continue this discussion. Absolutely. And that's the fun part, I think, is when we get to really start complaining. What did they get wrong?
Yeah, who got snubbed? Yes, indeed. So one last time, flopcast.net and the ESO network. Check it out. The Flopcast. I was trying all day to think of exactly a way to describe your show and all the topics you cover. I try to cover a wide array of topics.
Yeah.
But I'm not even close to the Flopcast on as far as it's concerned. So tell us a little bit more about what the Flopcast does.
The Flopcast is me, and it's Cornflake. Cornflake is my lovely co-host, and we cover a lot of the similar subjects that you'd hear on these sort of geek-friendly shows that we have so many of on the ESO network. So we talk a lot about comic books, TV shows, cartoons, movies, conventions. We go to conventions all the time, so all that fun stuff. Music, obviously. I think we go into music a lot more on the Flopcast than most other shows on the ESO network. But also at the same time, I think that we're really the silly corner of the ESO network. So we like to keep things very light and very silly on the Flopcast. And we also, for some reason, talk about chickens all the time.
Fair enough, indeed. So that's Kevin from the Flopcast. We truly appreciate you being part of the Pop Culture Cosmos this week, and definitely look forward to having you back on next week as well.
Hey, this was fun. Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. All right, and we're going to start back up again in 3. And we're back here at the Pop Culture Cosmos. This is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. How is everyone out there again? And I just want to say before, getting on with my guest here, going on with the guest here, I want to say thank you to everyone out there who listens to us also on all of our radio outlets, on all of our downloadable outlets, because we're available on the Podcast Radio Network, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, the ESO Network. Check it out, esonetwork.com, which I will mention again here in a second. Tangent Bound Network, we're also available on iTunes, Stitcher, podcast.com, Google Play, and of course, our home site, popculturecosmos.wordpress.com. So we've got a great guest that has returned back to us today. It is Kevin from the Flopcast. The Flopcast is one of the most original podcasts that's out there and available. You want to check it out. It is I haven't told him this yet, but I from my investigation and listening to it, I think it's a cornerstone of the ESO network.
Wow.
Because 238 episodes, and you should consider yourself a cornerstone indeed. It is a great listen. You want to check it out, flopcast.net, for all the information on what they're doing, but also the ESO network. Kevin, it's been it's a great pleasure having you on, and just appreciate you coming back onto the show.
Well, thank you, Gerald. I'm honored. What an introduction, and great to be back. Had a great time talking about the Hall of Fame last week, and yeah, ready to talk some more.
Oh, that's awesome indeed. Yes. So we talked last week about the candidates themselves and how they could, people could vote out there on them. Hopefully we'll find out in the near future who those eventual candidates, will be, those that will be enshrined. But it was a outstanding list of candidates. I mean, this was a fully packed one. I don't think there's really many that could complain about those that are on there.
Yeah.
But I want to say that there is always some complaint about the ones who may be already in, or even more so the ones who have not been put in or who didn't even get nominated this time around. So,
Yeah,
Kevin,
absolutely.
I ask you, who is the first, few groups or artists that you think should be nominated as a no-brainer to at least get nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
All right. Well, I have one big definitive answer to that question because there's one act who I've been whining and complaining for years, absolutely deserves to be in and has never been nominated. And I believe some people involved in the Hall of Fame have sworn that they will never be nominated. And that's the Monkees.
As someone who loves them dearly, as someone who knows their influence as far as from a TV standpoint, yes, they were put together by Hollywood, but they made themselves into a group, a band that defined themselves with their own music. Someone who, as a kid, watched their reruns on their shows, and someone who has seen them. Well, I didn't see them in I haven't seen them on their recent tour, but I did see them in concert in their first go around, after MTV popularized their show.
Yeah.
I could not agree with you any more than that. That's definitely something indeed.
And yeah, that this is a band that's, again, there are people, I believe, involved in the Hall of Fame, the very upper echelon of whoever the overlords are of the Hall of Fame, who do not want the Monkees to be inducted. And I think that's a shame because this is a band that, yeah, they were silly, they were goofy, they had a funny TV show. Okay. Now, does that mean you can't get in the Hall of Fame? Because this was a massively popular band, for one thing, super popular, huge pile of classic American pop and rock songs that everybody knows. And people make the argument, oh, they weren't really playing. They didn't really play their own instruments. For one thing, false. For another thing, irrelevant. People say they didn't write the songs. That's false, and it's irrelevant. Lots of acts in the Hall of Fame had songwriters that they worked with. Not everyone in the Hall of Fame wrote all their own songs.
That's correct.
Elvis Presley didn't write his own songs, the Monkees did write a lot of their own songs in addition to working with so many other brilliant songwriters over the years. They were, even from day one, even when they were just hired to make the goofy TV show, they did play their own instruments, not on the original recordings, but they were experienced musicians going in. And right from the beginning, they started touring. They went out and played as a live band. So yeah, they were assembled to be TV stars, but they very quickly became a real band and just one of the classic American rock bands, and just beloved to this day. This is their 50th anniversary year. Boy, it would have been nice if this had been the year that they finally caved in and gave them a nomination, but nope. Once again, they were not on the list. And I sure hope that they recognize this mistake at some point and let them in. And, these guys are in their 70s now, and we've already lost one of the Monkees. We have 3 of the Monkees still with us. It sure would be nice if they're ever going to get in. Let's do it sooner rather than later.
And Michael Nesmith, who, if you discuss that question about the validity of their music playing would probably, tell you a thing or two about that in, probably so many words, because he always is, of the four, had always take the most exception to that. From what I've seen in interviews and read in interviews and whatnot, he has stopped touring with the band. He no longer plays with them. His final performance was a couple months ago, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's just basically right now Mickey and Peter. And I definitely agree with you on that. I would love to see them be nominated. Everything that you asked for. They had a sound that was unique. That I don't want to say it rivaled the Beatles, but they had a sound that variated themselves similar to the Beatles as far as they were, okay, they're going to be straight guitar this time, then they're going to synthesize, next time they're going to, listen to their music from the course of all their albums, which again leads you into a popularity situation. They were huge. They were one of the top 10 bands of the 1960s as far as from a success standpoint. You can't deny it. The numbers are there.
And they made all kinds of music. I mean, there isn't really a Monkees style sound because they made a lot of pop and rock music, but they also strayed quite a bit into folk rock and country rock. And all four Monkees sang lead to one extent or another. So their songs have very different sounds because you have multiple lead singers as well.
Exactly. And how many bands can say that? So
yeah, not a few, not many. So and again, I feel very biased when I start singing the praises of the Monkees because I'm admittedly just a lifelong huge Monkees fan. I love the band. I've seen them live several times now, including this year on the 50th anniversary tour. And they just absolutely, though, I don't think there's a valid argument to be made for them not to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
No, and I agree with you 100% on that. They are probably one of the biggest slights at this point in time to not even be nominated or considered. And like you said, if there is a hierarchy that's still there that wants to shut them out, that's to their detriment. And unfortunately, because the fans out there understand the greatness of what the Monkees did, and I think it, when they were reborn, almost quote unquote, or their rebirth in the 1980s, just reignited their popularity. And even in the 50th anniversary, didn't their album chart again as far as their latest album, which they made for their 50th anniversary, that charted very high once again, correct?
That's right. Yeah, they had a hit album this year, 50 years later.
Exactly.
They made a new album. It's a great album. All four Monkees are on the album because they actually dug up some Davy Jones vocals to use on one of the songs. So, and it's a great record. And their tour is fantastic. Even the Mickey Peter tour that they're on right now, there's only two Monkees on it. They still do a great show.
Yes, indeed. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. It just, the Monkees are, they were a heavy influence in my life at an early age. I'm not going to be dishonest with you as well. And definitely not having him in there is a topic of deep discussion on why that is. Any other bands that stick out in your mind as something, maybe that needs to be put in? I know, I forget, has Genesis or Phil Collins some sort, or Peter Gabriel at some point in time? I think Peter Gabriel's in, correct?
Yes, Peter Gabriel as a solo artist has been inducted, and Genesis has been inducted.
Genesis has, but not Phil Collins.
No, not Phil Collins as a solo artist.
Okay, that's something to me. I understand that people know him for his ballads more, but I think he's become he is influence. I'm not a huge Phil Collins fan, but obviously, In the Air Tonight and as far as is concerned, and all of his songs that he made as a solo artist, I think put at least get him nominated.
I agree. That's not a name that I immediately think of as far as someone who should be in, but yeah, I agree. And he just ruled the 1980s. When you think he just, from rail to rail, he spent that entire decade just cranking out, both with Genesis and even more so, I think, as a solo artist.
Yeah, because he achieved more success as a solo artist.
So many classic songs. So yeah, definitely. I think he should. He probably deserves a nomination at some point. It is nice that at least he is in as a member of Genesis, but he could certainly get in again. And there are a lot of people have been inducted twice. There's several members of the Hall of Fame who are in as solo and as part of a band, or as part of two different bands. I think Ron Wood can make that claim. Ron Wood was
Yes.
inducted for the Stones and for the Faces.
Yes, that is correct. I just knew, as far as off the top of my head, I knew that some part of the triumvirate of Peter Gabriel, Genesis, and Phil Collins. One of them was just like shut out, and wrongly so. So
Yeah, I think
from at
you're
least a
right.
nomination, at least.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other
Another,
names that stick out to you?
yeah, there's a few that I always like to trot out for discussions like this, and another one that I think definitely I would like to see in is Devo.
Yes, yes, definitely indeed.
Just a massively important band, I think, and this is a band that came up in the late 70s, and they were really like nobody else. They were just out of the gate so weird. These guys had their own idea about what they were going to do, just these kind of weird kids out of the middle of Ohio, and to incorporate just strange concepts and storytelling and video and spoken word and costumes into what they were doing to that extent. And just they were really bringing ideas and concepts to their music. And at the same time, they were a cool band. They were a fun band.
Well, I remember them from the early '80s as part of the LA music scene. Along with obviously they created such a unique sound with their new wave hits, and help launch the new wave scene. But they were so integral, as far as from living in Southern California like I did at that time. Just hearing them heavy in rotation, as far as from a new wave, new wave of music
Sure.
coming out at that point in time.
Absolutely. And they were a band that's they kind of reminded me of Kraftwerk, strangely, in some ways, even though they weren't strictly an electronic band. But vocally, they did a lot that had that kind of robotic sound to their voices sometimes. Um, they were, and they used a lot of keyboard, but also a lot of guitar. And obviously people know Whip It. They know their big hit song, and you think of the crazy yellow suits and the energy domes, the flower pots on their heads, and they had
Yes.
just those great visuals. But they were also making before MTV existed, going back to the 70s, they were making weird music videos and entire like short films incorporating their music. They did some strange stuff on film back then, and just they kind of built up their own mythology about their concepts of the de-evolution and the characters. Boogie Boy, this they'd have a character just wearing a crazy mask running around, having spoken word parts on some of their records, and just the staying power they had as well. In that Devo is still around today. They never went anywhere. They had a huge influence, and not huge commercially outside of Whip It, but they were, as you said, that just one of those crucial acts of the birth of the new wave.
Exactly, indeed. As far as any others that stick out in your mind as well?
Another favorite of mine that I'm surprised has not been inducted yet is the Go-Go's.
Indeed, yes. Good, very
Because
good choice.
here you've got, or they're a rock band, they're a punk band. They came out of that early '80s punk scene in Los Angeles, and these were girls. It's an all-girl band. You have to acknowledge that very important, I think, as one of those early bands that were all women, and very quickly established. They rose out of punk and kind of learned how to play and learn how to sing as they were getting attention, just because they were such a strong, fun act visually and musically, that they were quickly growing and evolving just in their very early days. You go back to like early Go-Go's records, recordings of their old club shows when they were punks, and it sounds raw and it sounds crazy, and it's funny to look at just how quickly they evolved into a pop rock act that was quickly making classic American pop songs.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's an excellent choice indeed. A lot of those bands from the '80s, early to mid '80s, seem to have been shut out. Is that maybe somewhat that the industry or the people responsible, like we were talking about, as far as the Monkees being shut out, them not really enjoying or not really appreciating that part of the music scene? Although this year they have included band. Well, no, they actually haven't included that many bands from that era Depeche Mode, I guess maybe is probably the band that sticks out from that
Yeah.
era that they have nominated.
Yeah, and I think that that's one that we didn't get around to even discussing last week when we went through the nominees. But I think you're absolutely right. There's the people that run that nominating committee they tend to favor the hippie era. They're looking at what was cool in 1968 as opposed to what was cool in 1984. Certainly, when they're looking at who they should nominate. There are exceptions. There's always exceptions, but I think for the most part, a lot of the acts of the '80s are not getting enough of a look as far as being nominated as they think they deserve. And Phil Collins, we mentioned already, the bands like the Go-Go's, Duran Duran. I would look at. I think huge oversights in the area of metal, in that really very few metal acts have been inducted, and major metal acts I don't think have ever been nominated. And I'm looking at Iron Maiden has not been nominated. Judas Priest has not been nominated. Motorhead. And it sounds ridiculous when you think about it. This is a rock and roll hall of fame.
Those
to
are
not include these acts.
Those are iconic names in the industry. How could you not have a rock and roll hall of fame and not have Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, like you said, Duran Duran, which, I don't want to say was, rivaled the Beatles' success from a, standpoint as far as, but when Rio, the album came out and they toured America and the UK, they were just a phenomenon that people hadn't seen for 20 years prior, correct?
Yeah. And Duran Duran, that's one of those bands that they're a victim of their own image, and that these were they looked like models. They looked like they should just be on posters of 13-year-old girls' lockers. And you think of Duran Duran, and you think of the videos. You think of them riding around on a yacht in the Rio video, and that's Duran Duran as far as most people are concerned. If you look beyond that, these guys were a great band. That the songs were great, and they were a fantastic live band. These were not just this was not just MTV Pretty Boys, which is what we think of.
And they actually, when they went through a down period as far as in the late 80s, they actually went and revived themselves again with some even more inspired music, which put them back into the hierarchy of the music world at a later period of time, correct?
Yeah, they had a nice little comeback in the late '80s, early '90s, and I think especially in the last few years, and they've been putting out new albums as well. The last 7-8 years, I think they've put out 2-3 records, and it's good stuff. And I saw them in concert maybe 8 years ago or so, and I was amazed. Like, wow, this is a fantastic live rock band, and I don't think people realize enough that Duran Duran, definitely one of the classic bands of the '80s.
Well, if you're able to, and Depeche Mode's great. I love Depeche Mode. They've had great body of hits and whatnot, and I'm glad they're nominated, and I hope to get in. But how do you go ahead and nominate them and nominate some of the most successful artists from that era, like the Go-Go's and especially Duran Duran? I mean, that one sticks out like a sore thumb. When you take those blocks of time and you look at the most influential and iconic groups from that era, maybe not on a sound basis, but what it did to our culture and how much it promoted the music industry.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that I would think that as time goes by, people are only going to look back more fondly on a lot of these big artists of that era. So I think eventually we're going to see those bands get more attention. And I mean, you can go right down the line looking at Cyndi Lauper, looking at Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, the hair metal acts, Motley Crue. A lot of these guys deserve to be in as well.
I couldn't agree with you more, because they created their own image, especially when you're concerned with Def Leppard, Motley Crue. I mean, my goodness, those. How can you not? There's some notable names that are not indeed part of it. I wanted to throw two out there that were iconic when they were making, a lot of hit albums. Tina Turner with her comeback, and obviously with, emanating from her period of time with Ike Turner, but evolving into a humongous solo artist, during her peak. And then also Whitney Houston the late
Yeah.
Whitney Houston as well. So, I mean, those two are the two names out there. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, and Tina Turner has been inducted with Ike. Ike and Tina Turner were inducted a long time ago. They were certainly one of the earlier nominees when the Hall of Fame started, I think, and rightly so. Now that said, you could still induct Tina.
Yes,
That
as
every
a solo artist, I think it should be a given.
And yeah, I agree, and it's something that it doesn't necessarily occur to people, I think, because they see her name right there on the list. Like, okay, there she is, Tina's in. Well, there is a precedent for this, and I'm looking at Paul Simon because Simon and Garfunkel were inducted, and then Paul Simon was inducted as a solo artist. So he's one of the people that has been inducted twice, and both times under his own name.
Exactly.
So Tina
So,
could do that as well.
and Tina Turner reached heights that Paul Simon as a solo artist never did, as far as from a musical standpoint, a success standpoint. Correct.
Yeah, yeah, yep. I would also look at Lionel Richie.
There you go.
And
Exactly.
again,
Indeed.
with
I
with
mean,
the Commodores, and he's another guy like Phil Collins who just ruled the '80s.
and who has a better line of success than the actual group that was nominated, that was inducted in.
Yeah, although actually the Commodores I don't think have been nominated yet. They haven't been inducted, but
Oh, then my
yeah,
mistake on that.
but I think you could make that argument though, at least to get Lionel in.
Yes,
Absolutely.
because oh my gosh, all night long and hello, just
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on and on with some great tunes from him. Whitney Houston, my goodness, she is
yeah.
eligible for the Hall of
Oh,
Fame, and how
sure.
she is not in after she, her voice defined the '90s is just beyond me.
Yeah, Whitney definitely deserves to get in as well. I definitely agree. Absolutely.
So, any other names stick out, or is there anyone down the road that you see, that you see will become a part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a no brainer?
Let's see. As far as people that are more contemporary that are not eligible yet, that's probably will get inducted down the line. Let me
Is Green
think.
Day in?
Yes,
Yes, that's
Green
what.
Green Day was inducted just 2 years ago, I think.
Okay,
So
okay.
yep, they got that. That was one of those. As soon as they were eligible, they
I
got
was
right
going to
in.
say you can't leave them out. So
Yeah, yeah, which I think we're going to see that with Pearl Jam this year. Well, a similar band actually, I would say, is Foo Fighters.
really, Foo Fighters. I mean, obviously, from a musical standpoint, their sound quality is outstanding. But as far as from a name value, um,
They've had a bunch of hit songs and they've been around a long time now. So and I think people you think of Foo Fighters, you think okay, this is Dave Grohl's post Nirvana project, but that's been his post Nirvana project for a long time now, and I think they're gonna get in sometime pretty soon.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that. I think the Foo Fighters has been a solid name in the industry, like you said, since the days of Nirvana, and Dave Grohl has gone on to great success with them. I just didn't know if they were the slam dunk that many that you see that they are, as far as I'm concerned. But I could definitely see them getting nominated and going in, eventually as well. So,
Sure.
any other names stick out as far as I'm going to say Beyonce.
Oh
I think
yeah, yeah,
that's someone who
definitely.
is still today just defining the industry. Any others as far as that's concerned that you see will maybe some of today's contemporary artists like Adele, Lady Gaga. What about some rock bands as well? I mean, obviously it's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but is it just going to
Yeah.
migrate 10 years, 15, 20 years from now to just all pop bands?
Do they still make rock bands?
It's becoming harder and harder to find. I mean, obviously the name, when you go out and you see that the artists that are out there touring or the major names, the ones that are selling, most of them admittedly have a more pop sound,
Sure.
and not as much in a way. I mean, it's based off of individuals' tastes. And when we talk about rock bands maybe touring and whatnot, they're I don't want to say octogenarians like the Rolling Stones seem to be, but you know what I'm saying. They're older
Absolutely.
bands.
I mean, yeah, rock seems to be getting older, and I think it's probably to an extent, it's just the way pop culture, and I'm sure you know this better than anyone, being the host of the Pop Culture Cosmos, but pop culture is so fractured these days in a way it never was before, and that
I couldn't agree with you more on that.
everything has been split into subgenre after subgenre, and so it's the pie is being sliced into such tiny little slivers at this point that it's hard for anybody to really break and become those kind of huge iconic acts that everybody knows the way we used to have. You don't really
Well,
have many big stars anymore.
no, and I was reading an article one time about the not in the recent past, but I believe it was one of the people responsible or head of Fender guitars,
Yep.
saying that he was not deterred by the prominence of EDM, and which kind of leads me to believe, okay, if you have to actually shout that to everyone, that means, internally that they might be a little bit concerned about the future. But as you and I both have seen, I can say out of the course of my life, it's all cyclical.
Sure.
As far as the music tastes are concerned. Although back in the 80s, when I first really started getting into some music, I could tell you firsthand that the 80s seemed to be the best blend. I'm not trying to get nostalgic on people, and I'm trying to say the 80s is the best one, but it seemed to be the best variance of music that's accepted by a larger audience.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I also I fear that I'm falling into that nostalgia trap of that was my youth, those were my teen years, and so of course I think that's the best music there ever was, but it really was.
Well, when you listen to top 40 shows now, and then you go back into the early 2000s, then you go back into the then you go back into the 90s, then you go back into the 80s, and then maybe even the 70s, 60s, you see that the 80s was the period of time where top 40 songs, you could have a Def Leppard dominating the charts alongside a Duran Duran and alongside of other artists that have a different sound altogether.
Oh, sure. Alongside Kenny Rogers.
Yes, alongside Kenny Rogers, alongside, and it doesn't seem to be as much or as prominent as far as that variance of sound as it once was. I mean, now like you said, it is more subgenre. I mean, now EDM has almost has Billboard has a chart for everything. So it seems like when you say this X group hits X charts, it's hitting on that chart and they're number one on that chart. But are they number one overall on the other? It's not the way it used to be, obviously, when Michael Jackson reigned supreme for many years and whatnot.
Right.
And it just seems to be a different bass that we're listening to. I mean, but then again, we could be talking in 10, 15, 20 years now, again, like heavy guitar influence and EDM may be something that might be of the distant past, correct?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a little bit of everything, and the trick is knowing where to find it. And it's in jest, obviously, when I say, do they still make rock bands? Because of course they do, and there are plenty of young rock bands out today that are great that I love. I don't know who's on the top 40. I don't know what the top 40 is anymore. I don't listen to the radio. I'm in my bubble of listening to the stuff that I know and that I like, and I live in the Boston area, and I could recommend a half dozen great Boston bands that you've never heard of right now that I love going out and seeing live. And I'm sure you could do the same for bands in Vegas. And we all have our little pockets of new young bands that we know and we like, but are any of them going to break on a national level the way the bands did back in the 80s? Well, maybe not.
Yeah, because like you said, they live in a different time and live in a different age, and people listen to music differently than they have in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, indeed. So, Kevin, before I let you go, again, it's been a great pleasure having you on, but tell everyone out there how they can listen to one of the most unique and diverse shows that they must listen to. It's the Flopcast.
Wow, thanks for saying that, Gerald. And yeah, we are the silly, goofy corner of the ESO podcast network, I think. We like to keep things really light and very ridiculous around the Flopcast. And we're talking about comics and conventions and TV and old Saturday morning cartoons and sitcoms from the 70s and 80s and all the goofy old stuff that we love. Every single week on our silly show, it's me and it's my co-host Cornflake. And the easiest place to find us is just go to our website, which is flopcast.net.
That's indeed flopcast.net, and also esopodcast.com to catch their latest episode. at episode 238. But if you want to go back to what they talked about when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it is episode 235. So you want to give that one a special listen to if you're interested in all their thoughts on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
This goes back to the early days of the Flopcast. Whenever in the first year that we were on the air, like 5 years ago, we were complaining about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And a couple of the acts that we mentioned on that show have since been inducted. And I think, for example, Kiss was one of them back then.
Yeah.
And Hall & Oates.
Oh, that's true.
That's the power of the Flopcast.
This is true. Power indeed.
Although we can't seem to make it happen for the Monkees.
No, that's a bigger challenge indeed.
Yeah. We also we want Weird Al Yankovic as well to be in.
Oh,
we're working on that one too.
That one I think is going to be hard. I think that one's going to be really hard to get him in there because he's either has a lot. I don't know the music industry at all, but what I've seen and what I can observe, I can say maybe as an educated guess that he has a lot of love and a lot of dislike in the industry, and it's probably just right there polarizing when it comes to something like that as far as it's concerned.
I think a lot of people don't take him seriously.
And they should, because he's a very and well, all jokes aside, his music is really good, and what hurts the most is when his songs come out, like his latest album. Some of his songs actually sound better than the originals. Like Word Crimes. I would put up Word Crimes, although I don't think he would, because the artist he ripped off, the artist he emulated actually ripped off from someone else, after a court ruling. But Word Crimes is an excellent song. I mean, there's Eat It. There's tons of hits he's charted with. But yes, it's based off of someone else's music. But the way he can make it into his own, make it amusing, but also blended with a sound that is unique in his own, and it's great to listen to. I think that full combination should garner him as a respected artist, but I understand with what he deals in, it's very hard to overcome.
Absolutely. And again, I'm a huge Weird Al fan, obviously. And then especially on the Flopcast, we're obsessed with comedy music. We're both big Dr. Demento fans. Cornflake and I both have roots in the comedy music scene. So the sillier stuff is the stuff that we definitely lean towards. But I am so completely out of touch that when I ran out and bought the new Weird Al record last year, I did not recognize anything on it. I did not know any of the songs that he was doing parodies of. So I'm completely out of it.
Fair enough. As a father of two young daughters, I do have to listen to popular music of the day from pretty much a regular basis. So it was kind of...
You know what's going on then, more so than I do. I just live in my bubble.
Well, it was kind of nice to listen to, because like I said, some of his tracks were better than the actual original tracks that were he made, he was making quote unquote fun of. But as an artist, he definitely should be respected indeed. And fact that he finally reached #1 on the Billboard album chart as a whole, not on just amusement or anything of that nature. He actually did, to achieve that honor finally, was definitely something that's was well deserved.
Yeah,
and people should see him in concert, because he's a really good concert as well.
Absolutely, go see Weird Al, please. Amazing show.
Indeed. So that's Kevin from the Flopcast. Any last notes? Any other things that we need to, as far as it's concerned, that both, as far as, the Flopcast is concerned, or anything else that you want to go ahead and promote?
Wow, let's see. I think we covered it. I mean, the flopcast.net, that's where you find me and Cornflake, and we're just doing our thing. It's been literally every 7 days since we started, we have released a show. So we are, I don't know what our problem is, but we're just waiting for someone to stop us. But until then, we're just going to keep putting out a goofy little show every week.
Well, as long as the FCC keeps you on the air, there you go, right?
That's right.
Well, I tell you what, like I said, a cornerstone of the ESO network. That's at esopodcast.com or flopcast.net. It's Kevin from the Flopcast, if I can say that correctly. Kevin from the Flopcast, it's been a true pleasure having you on the show. I hope and consider, that you will consider coming back on the show so we can talk about more great, make more great topics on the world of pop culture.
I would be happy to anytime. Hopefully we can get Cornflake on board as well sometime.
Oh, that would be awesome indeed. I'd love the chance to talk to both of you, as long
Sure.
as no fights on the air, though.
Well, we make no promises.
Okay, fair enough indeed. That's Kevin from the Flopcast, everyone. This is the Pop Culture Cosmos. We'll be right back. All right. And let me just stop this here. Thanks for watching, everyone.